In the last video, we started the drawing, went into the model space, made the grand assumption that we have a scale of 1 for one of our repeating shapes, and we drafted a box that was 1 unit by 1 unit. We could have done this with the grid on or off. We just did it without the grid as we learned to use the basic commands of lines, snaps, object snaps, where you use a shift right click to get the particular endpoints or midpoints, and then fillet radius 0 is which we use to extend lines to their logical intersections, or also to put in an arc that is perfectly tangent to the two lines or arcs which you are adding it to. Now I'm going to show you the key thing that you need to be doing when you are laying out schematics, and that is to make sure that your grid size and your snap size matches the set of blocks that you are using to do the schematic. You turn the grid and the snap on and off by holding a chord of the F7 and the F9. I'm going to push the two of them together now, and I just turned on. The grid and the snap are on. Now, for some reason, they're not showing up here, and we're going to see why. We're now going to type in snap and set the snap to 1 unit, and we're going to type in grid and set the grid to 1 unit, and we're going to say regen, and we're still kind of curious. It could be based on the limits, and I'm now going to type limits, and I'm going to type limits for -100, -100 to 100, 100, and I'm going to hit regen. The grid is not working. Snap on, grid on, F7, F9, grid off, grid on. So you can see it's a little odd, but once you get it set, I've set the grid up pretty large because I do not want to think I'm just being confined to paper. I'm hitting F7, F9, F7, F9, and for all reality, I'm not sure why it didn't immediately. And if you look as I zoom in here to this, I made that box the size of 1. And so finally I've got it to a point where the grid is kind of matching. Now, what you'll notice when the grid and the snap are on, it can be very difficult to manipulate things. I'm moving my mouse and it's going to jump from place to place there. If you think about it, it's a little bit like quantum theory, where things have to be in one place or the other. They can't be somewhere in between. They have to do with energy levels on electrons. Okay, that said, we're now going to review a real simple skill that we are going to grab pretty early, and that is that we're going to hit the F7 and the F9 together to turn the snap and the grid on and off. So off, on, off, on, off, on, off. We now would like to move. We could move the grid to our thing, but it makes a little more sense to move our thing to the grid because we're just getting started. What you're going to realize, as soon as something is off the grid, you're going to have a hard time grabbing it when the grid is on. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to sweep across this set of entities. They're called lines right now. This is actually 4 individual lines. I'm going to now left click on that entity, and you notice now I'm going to toggle through. Instead of using F7 and F9, I am hitting a space bar. And along the bottom, along the command line, you will see a set of potential commands I can use. F7, there's stretch, spacebar move, spacebar rotate, spacebar scale, spacebar mirror, spacebar stretch, spacebar move. Right now, and I'm going to click F8, which is the toggle for ortho, which it doesn't let me do. Alright, right now I'm going to now turn on the grid by hitting F7 and F9. And because the ortho is on, and it's unfortunate, I'm going to come down here and click the ortho off, because that now, and now because the snap is not on, I'm going to go back here and turn on the snap and the grid, Now you notice it's going to jump right through it. So F7, F9, F7, F9, F7, F9. Now the snap is on. It's going to grab right to that grid. Again, notice I hit an escape. Anytime things are highlighted and I do not want them to be highlighted, I can hit an escape. You remember that's part of the theme, escape, escape, escape. So you have basically a cursor that's going to jump around. That you will see at some point when you're drafting, that grid or snap will get turned on arbitrarily, it would appear by AutoCAD. If it's jumping around like that, there's a pretty good chance it's because you're snapping your grid around. If you notice along here, you may have icons. I like the words, and I will tend to always be drafting with them off until I tell you otherwise. So right now the snap and the grid are not on, and I can, to review, I could now arbitrarily draw a line from here to here, and because the snap, hitting a space bar to finish, because the snap and the grid were not on when I did it, it'll give you issues, it'll give you problems, it'll give you conniptions. Unless, of course, you know that you can change the snap and the grid in the middle of a command. So, for instance, here, I can all of them on, all of them off, all of them on, F7, F9 together. It's a really key skill if you're going to be using the grid together, and I'm going to turn them off. I'm going to show you one more grip edit as we kind of try to think about, first and foremost, learning the way the Windows world worked this, and then going back into the really what you're going to learn to do for drafting, which is going to be to really think about starting with orthogonal lines using Euclid's precepts, if you would, making things offset so they're square and orthogonal, and using a lot of fillets and a couple of circles to do almost all of your drafting. Line, offset, fillet, array for turning an angle, polyline edit for putting them together, the break command to breaking things into pieces, and then the region command to making closed shapes which then take you into the 3D world. To that we will add trim, extend, and a bunch of other commands. But if we can keep the number of commands we use on a regular basis to about 10, or I don't know, let's say fingers and toes, it'll make us much more effective. We will get more efficient later as we add more and more and more of these general commands. So remember, if I want to ungrip things, if I would, you hit an escape. I'm clicking again here. Now I'm left clicking, and I'm kind of now dragging around because of the two options I had. I'm kind of moving this thing around. Now I can hit F7, F9 together. Sorry. 7, F9, and if I wanted to grab that line particularly there, again, hitting F7, F9, grab this here, F7, F9 together, and F7, F9. And somehow I got off, snap on, grid on, and you have it. I will point out, finally, that as we make this block, I may have misspoke slightly. If in fact the blocks that we're going to make in here has a snap point in the middle of this line of 1, we're going to have a hard time connecting it up along a grid. So there's a relatively, depending on the size of your block, you might be making them 10 units tall, or probably at very least 2 units tall based on your grid, depending how it lays out. And we'll look at a few blocks in a minute or so here to see how we lay this out. But what I want you to remember is that if you're dealing with a grid, you want the grid and the block sizes to make sense. You do not want to get off the grid. If you do, if you get off the grid, you get back on it by dealing with the F7 and the F9 together. F7, F9, again, that's called a chord. You do them both at the same time. Every now and then you'll get off. No different than the chord of the shift right click to get your object snaps, which are endpoints, midpoints, quadrants, centers, tangents. And so don't get confused from the concept of snap and object snap, remembering that we try to draft as much as we can with all of these things off, unless you like the flea, The flea is when you turn on the dynamic. So if I'm drawing a line now, you see the question comes right there. Thanks for listening.